Welcome back, Eres fam, for another episode of Eres Tea Talks, where we spill the tea on taboo topics affecting our community. We are also now a podcast streaming on all major platforms. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our other episodes on our channel, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, ding ding, to be alerted on new episodes. Before we start, though, we do want to mention that this may be a triggering conversation. As a domestic violence survivor myself, I want to encourage you to take a step back when needed and care for yourself if you are triggered. I am Bianca, your host, coming from Lenape land, aka New York City, and with me are three incredible guests. So with everything that we've been talking about, one question that is always asked, or I feel like I've heard one too many times, is why do individuals stay? Right? And that's such a complex question. So I want to support that question of what, not only do individuals stay, but what are the barriers to leaving?
So I can speak on that. I had a conversation with my mother on, why she stayed. My mom and my dad separated after about 20 years of marriage. One of the things that she focused on was for her children to have a present parent, a father. Second was financial stability. And my mom is a housekeeper. So for my mom to maintain two kids, pay rent in New York City, and that is why she stayed. Like, where is she going to go? What's going to happen, to her children? Second is alienation. My mom didn't have anybody. She didn't have a support. My mom has always been the type of person to not air out her dirty laundry in public, and the embarrassment of everyone finding out what was going on is, why she stayed for so long till she ended up having the strength to leave. I feel that we stay because I want to say that there's love as well. What abusers do, which can also come from men and women, is that they make you feel like no one is going to love you the way that you do, the way that they do, especially when it comes to women with children. There is this narrative that no one's going to want someone with 2 kids or 3 kids. And that was something that ate my mom up. It's like, what's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to me? Once my mom kicked him out, my dad went around and told everybody and their mother, like, this woman kicked me out. This is what was happening. My mom was extremely embarrassed. She didn't want to talk to anybody. She isolated herself. She changed her number. The only person that she spoke to was her mother. So we no longer had our aunts. We no longer had our cousins because everybody was calling us. Like, even the pastor, he went to his little friend that was like a preacher, and he came to the house and was like, because God said, and you need to forgive, and XYZ. And then it's like, the one place where you used to go to get like clarity and to get answers is like, if I can't talk to God, who am I going to talk to?
And actually, like, religion can play a role because forgiveness is so much a part of a lot of them. So it's like, in order to be a good Christian, in order to be a good Muslim, you have to forgive them. So that's definitely, like, does play, and as well as a lot of the other institutional barriers. When people decided that domestic violence was a thing, it wasn't just a relationship anymore, and began to actually recognize the abuse, a lot of their resources were made with white, cis, straight, middle-class women in mind, right? And so white feminists are like, police, 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 we need police. And that's not always the solution for Black and brown communities, for LGBTQ plus communities. I know people who don't, like, the cops are never the first solution for any problem that a lot of us have. Also, like, if my partner is trans, are the police or any other services, are they going to misgender them? Are they going to place them in homes or institutions that don't respect their gender, right? Yeah. If I'm calling for help, I'm not trying to have my partner shot, right? Like, I'm calling because I want what is happening to stop, but that doesn't mean what I'm doing is, or that I want harm to then come to this person that I love and that I care for, who is my community often, right? And so I think it's also being able to recognize that people can't just leave, right? And sometimes people don't want to leave. What they want is the abuse to stop, but they don't want to leave their relationship. So oftentimes when, you know, potentially seeking resources, it's like some people are just like, how do I stay? How do I safety plan? And how do I stay here to, like, even if the relationship is abusive, right? Because there is love there. There is community there, right? Maybe we organized together. Maybe we prayed together, right? Oftentimes these people are a part of our community. They are what we consider to be our safety space, our safety zone, because they know us so intimately. So there's so many barriers. Like, it's not easy to just leave. And on average, it takes around 7 to 9 times for someone to leave.
Right. It does. Or, as you mentioned before, out of those 7 to 8 or 9 times, they may not want to leave at all because they do love their partner, and there's this hope that the partner will change and that it'll end. And that's all they want. They want the actual abuse to end. Yeah. And so, and I also wanted to mention, we were having this conversation before, it always comes down also to fear. Yes. Because when even the thought about leaving, even saying it out loud, could cause actual death within the relationship. And so that fear of losing their life and thinking about their children, not having a mother or a father in a situation. And I know we're using a lot of binaries, but even that fear exists within the LGBT community as well. It's just like, it's a scary situation to be in.
You know, like, a lot of stalking. Like, I remember once my mom was like, yo, I'm out, get the hell out. My dad was still coming around. We used to see him, like, peeking in through the window. So when we decided to leave and move to another apartment, my mom was like, yo, she used to leave at 5 a.m. She used to work in Long Island in Great Neck. So she would leave at 5 a.m. to take the bus. And she would see this dude, like, standing across the street in the corner, like, just watching, like, her every move. So then it's like, you know, I should have just stayed, because if he's going to end up doing this, what if one day, you know, what is he going to do next? I don't blame anybody for wanting to stay, because it's just like you said, it's fear.
And it's way more complicated as we're learning about it than just getting up and leaving, especially if getting up and leaving can result in such violence as death. Yeah. You know, it ends up being, do I stay with the beatings, or do I stay dealing with the other forms of abuse to stay alive? Or do I take my chances, and those chances end up with me dead? And if you throw in children in the LGBTQ community, you think about preserving community. So you're like, well, I don't want to out nobody, or I don't want the community to turn against nobody because we're such a small community. When you throw in all these factors, that greatly changes what should be a straight answer of being able to get up and go. But it's no longer that when all the factors are now intertwined and woven into one another.
A lot of what Black and brown communities do is a lot of victim blaming. You know, how we were speaking before with, like, Sarah, and what she mentioned, the dynamics of white feminism and what it looks like for them. You know, they have all these resources. It's so much easier for cops to believe what is going on with them, you know. So what was it that I said before? Black and brown women get caskets, white women get Lifetime shows.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a re-victimization. Yes. Like, if they go into these institutions that they want the support and the help, they're usually re-victimized. And that is, it's mostly Black women. That happens mostly to them. Their children are taken away from them. They have no support from anyone. It has a lot to do with racism as well, and understanding that that loyalty to community as well is just like, if I call the cops, everything's gonna go down here, you know. So that's also part of the thinking and the barriers of leaving, and we don't even ask ourselves, like, why does he do that in the first place? You know, why does he do that? It's just like, or she or they, although it's just like, why is that person doing it in the first place? And it's always like re-victimizing or victim blaming is like, why doesn't they, you know, and those are the barriers.
So how can we hold the person causing harm accountable and still, if we wanted to, have them get help? I mean, I feel like they would also want to have help as well.
Yeah. I think by having conversations in the beginning and like nipping things in the butt right there. Like, if you start noticing like toxicity, it's like, have that talk right there. And if that person can't grasp how toxic their behavior is, make an exit right there. Red flags are so important. Pay attention to them.
If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, Connect develops unique programs and innovative ways to prevent interpersonal violence and promote gender justice, transforming the beliefs, behaviors, and institutions that perpetuate violence. Through teaching community members and professionals about the root causes, consequences, and complex dynamics of interpersonal and gender violence, Connect builds the capacity to identify, respond to, and prevent interpersonal and gender violence in our communities. For more info or to access the virtual programming, visit connectnyc.org.
When I decided to finally talk to my dad and let him know, I mean, like, this is after like tons and tons of therapy that I had, because I've even had CBT therapy to help me have this conversation without being all like, well, you did XYZ and blah, 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 blah. So with him, it was more like he said, no one gave me a book on how to parent correctly. You know, he did acknowledge that he was wrong, and but him himself said, I didn't know that what I was doing crossed that line, that it was abuse, because my dad himself was also abused. His father was an alcoholic and was extremely abusive, to the point where he was also extremely berating, you know, where he would not just beat on his wife, but berate his kids. So for my dad, what it looked like was, this is how I grew up. And the way he took it in is like, well, if my kids respond the way that I respond, then it is okay for them to get beat the way that I did. And then I told him, you know, how wrong he was. And he was like, I understand that now. And I don't know if he's trying to get the help, but I feel like in having conversations later on, when we are ready to have the conversations, I think also coming from love, you know, love for yourself mainly. And also understanding that these harmers and these abusers, these toxic behaviors that come from these people are learned. You know, they are victims too.
And remembering that people who cause harm and who can be labeled as abusers are human beings too. You know, so to put all... to sit there and just leave that label as is without that context is, in a weird way, a disservice to them even being able to get help.
Yeah.
Or to not so much have understanding, but to allow for the process of healing to begin.
Yeah.
There's also there's a saying that those who have been harmed can cause harm. I think there's like a cliche
Hurt
of it.
people,
like, hurt people, right?
Yes.
And yes, it's true. The same way people have their layers of trauma, those who abuse or cause harm do have many levels of trauma themselves. Although I don't want to take away from the word choice, right? We were having that conversation before because we know that there's systemic violence and that's woven and interwoven in our society, in our communities. And there is like this sense of humanity and compassion that we should have towards each other, especially for our communities of color. And I know that loyalty could also cause harm in some way or another. But we really need to focus on those systems of accountability that will radicalize our relationships, because transformation is being seen and given to other folks that don't necessarily look like us or maybe have access or money. That transformation exists for them. Why can't it exist for my homeboy across the street? So it's just it's that and we need to center the agency and the urgency on the victim. So that's very important, when we talk about this and when we talk about hurt people who hurt people.
So the survivor has the right not to engage, but I believe it's the community's obligation to make sure that the person who is causing harm is seeing that transformation, right? Like when I think about, like when we talk about like racism, right, and that it's not on Black and brown and indigenous and other people of color to teach white people, that it's on woke white people to actually like help other white people. That is oftentimes what that looks like, right? The community needs to be able to help that person who is also causing harm. And I think that's what the help and accountability looks like. It doesn't come from the person being harmed, right? It comes from the people who are standing next to the person doing the harm, right? And it's about being able to find community to hold that space for you to be able to shift and transform. But we need to be able to have the community know what behaviors needs to be shifting and transforming. Right. And I think we know that by using how we treat the people who are most marginalized. Yes. Right? That's the way we'll know if I have the ability to even address this, is how am I treating someone who I have power and privilege over, right? If I can do that, then I do have the ability to then help other folks, right? So a lot of that is the community doing work on ourselves, and we are doing that, right? So like, let's not say that it's not happening, right? So it's in existence, it is happening.
Transformation can happen.
Yes,
it's not going to happen in 24 hours or in 2 weeks. It takes a very, very long time. But so the systems of accountability have to be placed in a very understanding way of peeling all the layers of both the person, the victim, and the survivor, or the one who has caused harm or abused. And we're using all these terms because we're sort of like transitioning and understanding like who is the harmer, who is an abuser. So the harm can happen once or twice. Yeah. An abusive abuser is someone who's deliberately doing it on a pattern consistently, so.
And also, from what I've learned around language, as well as that, like, abuser is like a title, right? Where it's like, if I'm saying this person causes harm, or is the harm doer, or the person that does X, Y, Z, it also allows that person to hear themselves as being able to change. And you've also mentioned like support, and you said accountability system that, as all of us who potentially have caused harm, and maybe not in an abusive way, right? Like, we all cause harm, and we all, in a hopeful way, have our friends who can support and hold us accountable. That is also what's in this space, right? Like you said, we're not trying to throw out people. I mean, sometimes that that may be what is necessary at certain points in that accountability structure, but also being able to find folks who support that person through their journey. I've seen, or I've heard, actually, I haven't seen, around, and there's like debate around doing like RJ circles or sort of justice circles, specifically around DV. Like, I've heard debates about it, and in spaces where I've seen or heard of it working, oftentimes it's like that person's circle, the person who received harm, their circle, talking to the circle of the person who's doing harm, so that they're checking in to consistently be like survivor-centered, and making sure that like the person who's causing harm is also addressing the reasons why they think that behavior may be acceptable, and how does that person also need to be held accountable. They're being a part of their own process with their support system. It's not easy work at all. So, like, none of anything that we're talking about is easy, because we're talking about shifting centuries of like programming.
Yeah. It's unconditioning.
Yeah, it's unconditioning, it's unlearning, it's all of the things. And so we've mentioned resources, the term, quite a bit. And so what resources do victims or survivors have, and how can someone be of support? Kind of like things to do, things to say, things not to do, things not to say, alongside any resources that individuals who feel like they are being harmed, or you may know someone that you feel is being harmed, that you can reach out to.
I could chime in on that. The first thing that comes into my mind is always letting that person know whatever's happened is not your fault. Whatever's going down is just not your fault. And I'll believe the person, believe them, let them know it's not their fault. And always don't go in there thinking that you're going to rescue this, we're not rescuers. And we use the term a lot of like being the anchor. That anchor is just like steering, that big boat or whatever is the person, right? It's just because we don't want to, the person has a lot of power. And so they're trying to go into that power and understand that if we go into wanting to control them as well, they're going to lose their power. They're not going to we're disempowering them at the same time. So that's something that I always think about, is just like, understand that they want just to have someone there as their anchor.
Yeah. And definitely not like victim blame. Don't ask things like, well, why do you stay?
So what did you do?
What did you do to incite the behavior? Like, what did you say to them? Because, it's still part of like victim shaming, and asking, like, you must like it if you've stayed for so long.
Common.
That's such a common.
It's such a common. And please, no judgment. I mean, I know that.
Because it could happen to anybody.
Also, don't judge when you hear, even if it's not like your friend. Like, you might hear the story about the person down the block. Being very mindful of how you're reacting to that, because your friend might actually be experiencing it, and if you're like, oh, that person is stupid, and you're basically repeating everything that we said not to do, you no longer became that anchor for your friend. Your friend is no longer going to reach out to you because they're like, this is what you think about people who experience this. And people who experience harm oftentimes already feel shame, already feel embarrassment. And so being able to also just like check in with yourself, because if you got your stuff a little messed up, you might not always be, and by messed up, I mean like maybe I'm having a bad day and my partner pissed me off, and now I'm like, F everybody, people ain't shit. That's not what somebody's trying to hear when they're seeking help. And so also checking in with yourself to see if you have the emotional capacity, or even the, financial or physical capacity. Because oftentimes we're like, let me know if you need anything, I got you. And then they come with anything, and you're like, actually, I don't have that. Right? So being also mindful of like your own limitations. Yes. And when you're mindful of your limitations, you're able to actually provide other resources, like Connect, like the Family Justice Centers, that
Safe Horizon, the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Because Safe Horizon, I actually, I went to in researching to be able to talk, I actually went to the hotline website, and the first thing that popped up was a message on the information where it directed you to another section of the website, and it says, if you fear your internet being monitored, press OK, but go to this tab. So it's like if you're able to access internet, because not everybody is, can afford, the web. But if you are, you can do it on your phone. They literally direct you where to go just in case.
And that's another great thing just for like business owners that might be listening. Having Wi-Fi can actually save somebody's life. We see a lot of the posts where it's like, act like it's 19 something something and read a book, interact with the person next to you. We don't have Wi-Fi. But for especially the young people, they might not have minutes, but they have a smartphone that if they connect to Wi-Fi, they can start to use it, right? And so, it can actually save people being able to have access to Wi-Fi because their phone might not actually be on. And just like another resource that I love to shout out for young people, specifically under 24, is Day One. So it's dayoneny.org.
And now for our final sip of tea. I think it's important to call out a few things again. 1, there are many barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. 3 barriers to leaving an abusive relationship that we would like to mention are A, the fear of what the person causing harm will do, B, love for their partner and the hope that they will change, and C, wanting both parents present for their children. 2, centering victims and survivors looks like listening to what they need while holding space for them as they figure things out. And 3, as a community, we need to hold space for the transformation of the person causing harm, first by seeing them as human and not just as an abuser, and holding them accountable for their choices. What does a strong support system for victims and survivors look like to you? Be sure to share your answer in the comments and continue the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to follow us on Instagram at eres.u. I want to thank our guests for joining me, our viewers, and Connect for the work they do. The conversation continues, so stay tuned for next month's episode on healthy relationships. And never forget, Eres you, own it. See you next time.